Howard Hughes, one of the richest men ever, movie mogul, famous aviator, obsessive womanizer, he's become legendary for his strange behavior, particularly later in life. He bought a hotel in Las Vegas and lived as a recluse, growing his beard, fingernails, and hair long. He binge watched TV and movies, and he urinated in jars. We've all been there. He apparently had the specimens preserved and stored in his closet. He was also an obsessive germaphobe who would eat the same meal for dinner every day: steak, salad, and a dozen peas. In reality, his behavior was likely due to brain damage caused by syphilis, which exacerbated his OCD. His reclusive lifestyle was also encouraged by the fact that he was increasingly deaf later in life. Hughes was diagnosed with neurosyphilis in the early 1930s, so he's likely to have contracted syphilis as a young man in the 1920s. Syphilis is a complicated disease with several stages. The effects of neurosyphilis can include mood swings, personality changes, and cognitive decline. In the 1930s, there was no effective treatment for syphilis. Penicillin wasn't widely available until the mid-1940s. So in the 30s, Hughes apparently underwent mercury treatment, which was popular and common, but was not only ineffective, but it was also poisonous and it could have serious side effects. Hughes was later treated with penicillin, but by that point the disease is very likely to have irrevocably damaged his nervous system. Several commentators have noted that Hughes' deteriorating mental state was also exacerbated by a number of severe head injuries resulting from 14 plane and car crashes and the pain-killing drugs he began taking after a fiery 1946 plane crash in Beverly Hills. Lots of concussions and neurosyphilis. Yeah, that's rough. That's going to have a serious effect on your mental health. After 2 decades of living as an obsessive compulsive recluse, Hughes died in 1976 at the age of 70, apparently of kidney failure, which may have been related to his drug abuse or the mercury treatment that he received when he was in his 20s. Hughes did well to get to 70. The penicillin obviously stopped syphilis from killing him outright. Hughes was born in the early 20th century. People suffering from syphilis in the 19th century or before did not have it so lucky. Italians, Germans, and Brits called syphilis the French disease. So let's take a look at a couple of 19th century French literary stars. There's the poet Charles Baudelaire and the short story writer Guy de Maupassant. Both contracted syphilis in their early 20s and both went mad and died in their 40s. The themes of madness, the supernatural, losing the plot are all there in their work. There's also Toulouse-Lautrec, a 19th century French painter. He died in his 30s from alcoholism and syphilis. Here are some other notable figures that are thought to have contracted syphilis or to have died because of complications related to the disease. Franz Schubert, Robert Schumann, Bram Stoker. Stoker, of course, who wrote Dracula. Some critics have argued that he uses vampirism as a metaphor for syphilis. The novel reflects the societal fear of syphilis and the belief that it was spread by prostitution. Friedrich Nietzsche. This one is disputed. He was diagnosed with neurosyphilis, but some argue that he had a brain tumor instead. He had a mental breakdown and eventually died at the age of 55. Also, Vladimir Lenin, Adolf Hitler, Al Capone, Idi Amin. Syphilis in the 19th century was like AIDS in the 20th century, in that they were both incurable sexually transmitted diseases that were stigmatized and caused fear. Syphilis was very common in Europe in the 19th century. Some estimates say that more than 20% of Londoners had syphilis by the time they were in their 30s. The stigma surrounding syphilis is why most people aren't aware that all these famous people died with the disease. Syphilis was scary, it was embarrassing, so it was covered up. For example, Bram Stoker's cause of death is listed as locomotor ataxia, which is presumed to be a euphemism for syphilis. As I already mentioned, it's also a complicated disease with periods of latency and dormancy, which can make it easier to cover up or easier to miss. In the 20th century, publishers peddling Baudelaire's poetry, Maupassant's stories, or Toulouse-Lautrec prints, they weren't going to emphasize syphilis. It doesn't make for great marketing. Okay, we've been unfair to the French. This is a quote from an article that was published in a medical journal. So, the inhabitants of today's Italy, Germany, and United Kingdom named syphilis the French disease. The French named it the Neapolitan disease. The Russians assigned the name of Polish disease. The Polish called it the German disease. The Danish, the Portuguese, and the inhabitants of northern Africa named it the Spanish disease. And the Turks coined the term Christian disease. Moreover, in northern India, the Muslims blamed the Hindu for the outbreak of the affliction. However, the Hindu blamed the Muslims, and in the end, everyone blamed the Europeans. End quote. Dirty Europeans. Something similar happened with COVID.